Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Can't help myself. I love old houses. I don't know if it's that I love old houses because I've never had enough money in my life to go out and buy a mansion. So I'd settle on an old house and convince myself that, gee, I really like this old house. There's something about them, though. Even my granny's old house. You never know what could be waiting, hiding in the corners. I used to love to dig through her cedar chest when I was a little boy, look at old photos, that sort of thing. And, you know, she had a space in Louisiana. Many people build their houses up on blocks, right? Because it floods. Hers was no different. I love to go crawling under the house, look for things, always finding the same old rocks. You just never know what you're going to find adjacent to a structure, or maybe beneath the structure. Today on Body Bags, Brother Dave and I are going to discuss a case that has come across our desk. And the subject of our case today is someone that was found beneath a house. But that someone, when discovered, was a skeleton. And no one, for years and years, had any idea of who this person was. Until now. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. My co-host, Dave Mack. Good to see you, brother. Good to be on air with you.
You talk about going underneath your grandma's house, and all I'm picturing is that boy from Stand By Me looking for his money.
Looking for his pennies.
Yeah.
I love that. And you know, that came, we've been doing this too long together because that scene came to mind for me. And no, he's under there digging, looking for his pennies. Yeah.
That's like
I was never quite that industrious, though.
I was wondering if you had a comb in your back pocket when you were doing that.
I did. I used to carry a comb with me.
Watching that kid crawling on those railroad tracks,
I know.
That owns me because I'm so bad about heights. But Joe, this story is an Othram story, and it starts as an Othram story. Okay, a lot of times we end with an Othram story, and this is just a backwards case that it begins at the ending, and we backpedal our way into it because in 2023. There was this multi-person apartment home, okay? And it had been a rental for many years, from the 70s, 80s, 90s. As a matter of fact, this facility was a rental unit with multiple families up until 2018. And then that stopped. I don't know if it got to one of those things where it was going to be too expensive to continue to fix things up. But it sat, I was going to say abandoned, but it wasn't abandoned because from 2018, when they stopped renting out apartments in this building, other people took over and they were living there, not paying rent, okay?
Oh.
And they were just taking over and using it for whatever. Yeah. So for 5 years, that's going on until the demolition crews arrive. And this is in Niagara Falls, Ontario. A lot of times people don't realize how big Niagara Falls is. It's very large. And anyway, this is Niagara Falls, Ontario. And in 2023, they're demolishing this building. They're going to raise it. And as they start the process, lo and behold, they find, I'm going to guess, skeletal remains of a person. Because I cannot imagine, well, I don't know, like, Joe, do you know, was the skeletal remains closed? I mean, was this a person that was like, fell asleep and died and they just stayed there? Or what happened?
With the police service up there, they, even though it's happening there, they actually utilize the assistance in the ski, because you had mentioned that it was Othram.
Yeah.
They called on the Toronto Police Service as well, which is some distance, away from
Right.
this
Okay.
location specifically, because they knew that Othram had a relationship, that
Right.
with Toronto, or Toronto, they knew that, so they're going to avail themselves of that relationship.
I'm so glad people do that now because we've heard for years how departments are
Yeah.
so territorial, not wanting help because they don't want to give credit. These people immediately jumped on, we just need to solve this. We don't need to protect our territory. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, and I think that it is. And listen, I've been involved in cases where we did not have communication with other sister agencies that were working cases along, and some of them ran parallel. You hear these nightmare stories, particularly involving serialized events, where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. The initial handling of this case was actually the Niagara Regional Police
Okay.
Homicide Unit. And anytime you get a body that is found like this over a protracted period of time, they're not just going to say, the local coroner's not just going to say, well, I'll just make a ruling on this. We're not going to investigate any further, because the question you have to ask is, first off, how did this body wind up here? Why is it in the state that it is in? Now, my assumption is that there was at least some remnant of clothing that had been left behind. My experience, however, with a few exceptions, um, always tells me you're not going to have fully intact clothes. Now, I've had it where I might find a complete shirt, leather shoes, a belt. The case I've mentioned that was on Boden's autopsy program on HBO, that was mine, the body beneath the house. It had been there from 74 until 88, I think, is when we found that body. The guy that had taken his own life beneath that house, and his clothes was completely intact, which was really bizarre. But he was skeletonized. So you're not going to have, over a protracted period of time, you're not going to have intact remains. So this is not like a fresh body that they're coming across, Dave. When they begin to clear this area out, they're beginning to assess it. And I can only imagine, what would be going on in their minds, because, when you look at a building, a fixed structure like this, I love going like on Instagram and seeing historic images of, I love historical images.
Right.
I subscribe to a few of these things on there. I'm such a history nerd. And one of the things I love to do, or love to view, are these images where they'll have the building from like the 1700s, and then you'll have the same building in present day. And you can
Right.
see how much it's changed, or it hasn't changed. But one thing that does change is the surroundings. So you can have a standalone structure, but you can have other structures that are built up around it. You can also have vegetation growth where that changes. Hedgerows are put in, all kinds of flower beds are dug. And it's not necessarily, so you begin to think about, well, how could this person have gotten beneath this house? What are the points of ingress here? How would they go about it? Were they looking for shelter? Did they go into here, maybe do something relative to self-harm? You never know.
Let me ask you though, Joe, because what we do know is that this building had been vacant, not being used as a rentable unit for 5 years when the body was found, when the skeletal remains were found. So if I'm a detective and I'm looking at this and I find these, because they're going to raise the building and you get called, hey, we found a body or skeleton, and you arrive, immediately you're thinking, okay, the last time, this place was rented, was 2018. So is this skeleton from the time after that? Is it possible that between the time that it was last rented and today, this body could have been brought here? Or are they looking at the remains and going, I mean, can you really tell skeletal remains, Joe, within 5 years just by eyeballing them? I'm guessing not, but what would they look like?
Probably. Wow, good question. Thanks for painting me into a corner here, Dave. Okay. Yeah, I would say a really skilled forensic anthropologist could, but there are going to be circumstantial considerations here.
Okay.
You mentioned clothing, right?
Right.
Okay. Do you know that clothing to a certain degree is measurable? And I'm not talking about like your collar size or your jacket size, your shoe size. I'm talking about measurable in the sense of how it degrades. All right. So if you've got naturally occurring fibers,
Right.
they're going to break down at a rate that doesn't marry up, say, for instance, with synthetics.
Okay.
So if you just start there, all right, and that's one group, that's one column of information we have right here. Then we have another column right here that's going to do with scattering of remains. Okay, so do we have a complete skeleton? So we've got 206 bones, roughly, okay, in a human adult skeleton. How many of those are there? Then we're going to go to this column. In this column, we're going to be looking at the postmortem changes in the bone. You say, Morgan, what do you mean by that?
Right.
I'm glad you asked. I'm going to tell you.
Thank you.
So, so bones actually change color over a period of time, and they develop a patina to them. So the older the bones you get, they'll take on this kind of golden color. Now,
Even when they're kept inside something, indoors as opposed to outdoors?
yeah, you'll see them
Wow.
change like that. Now, I know many of you guys are thinking out there, well, I always see these movies where bones are out in the woods and they're white.
Yeah.
That's the exception and not the norm. We're not talking about southwestern United States, where you've got a skeleton that's laying out next to a dead horse skeleton
Right.
and the bones are all bleached,
Okay.
Uh,
So that's okay. Wait a minute, because we've been dealing with the Suzanne Morphew case for the last
Yeah.
few years, and remember when her skeletal
Yep.
remains were found,
yep.
that they looked at them and went, "These have not been in this situation. These bones are too white. They were put here after. They haven't been out here the whole time."
Yeah, I got to tell you, this is one of those interesting, and
Right.
I'm looking forward to this thing actually, that case, the Morphew
Mhm.
case, coming to trial.
Okay.
But remember, we've talked about this before, Brother Dave.
Yep.
The use of the word bleached.
Right.
Is it an action word? Like, hey, I'm going to
Let
take
me
these
get
bones
this.
and bleach them. Or
Right.
is it a naturally occurring event where you have exposed remains where they're being bleached by direct, the impact of direct sunlight?
Okay.
You know how one of the ways you can tell this is where the bones are deposited? All right. If the underside is not bleached out,
Oh.
they may have been deposited there or have left there. And so that area is protected. If you're getting direct sunlight on the visible surfaces, that's a different ball game. So and again, that's going to be highly nuanced and it's something you're going to look at. But with this case in particular, I would not expect, like when you go into, I wish I could describe to our friends what it's like to go under a structure to recover a body.
Uh-oh. Sounds like you and me are going to go on a little field trip, man.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it because I got to tell you, this case in and of itself is a grand mystery.
Yeah.
And the Niagara Falls area in particular, whether it's on the Canadian side or on the U.S. side, is a place that's visited by people from all over the world on a regular basis. The question is, how long had this person been there? And probably even more important, who are they? Other than being next to a dead body, what do you think is the most difficult thing about being beneath a structure with a dead body?
Oh my gosh. Because I'm coming at this from a different angle, of
Go ahead.
I'm thinking about this. I'm actually thinking about this person, not their skeletal remains. I'm thinking about the person, okay, that nobody was looking for. Or if they were looking for her, you just found her. There's so much in the moment, when these remains are found. But I'm thinking that this person was dead and they were placed in this place because they are placed in the basement, right? And I'm guessing that when investigators got in there, they were probably looking at clothing, looking at the style, and women's clothing. It changes, and it changes a
Regularly.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you were to look at somebody's clothing from a few, you could maybe come up with a decade or a period of a decade where the clothes might have been in style. And so my freaky part of being, under any kind of structure are all the creepy crawly things that actually live there
Yeah.
that don't want me there. Or in this case,
Well, they might want you there.
yeah,
See, use an
that's even
opportunity
worse.
to get out.
Even worse. But I am kind of curious though. I don't know how a building is raised. I don't know the process, of when you're demolishing a building.
Yeah.
But I guess they do clear a building before it's taken down. They go through every.
Yeah, they would. I would hope they would. But for me, the one thing that's always difficult, and right now I'm sitting here and my neck and my shoulders are aching. Right. Well, they're aching because I have arthritic changes. One of the contributing factors to that is being around the dead, in the sense that I would have to go into places like underneath a building, underneath a crawl space.
That's why you have interns, man. Go in there with
no,
a camera,
not if
Joe.
you want it done right. The
Right.
intern's not the one that's going to have to sit on the stand. And you have to work in such tight, confined spaces. You don't dismiss the fact that there is a body there,
Right.
but you try to become as clinical as you possibly can, because through that clinical mindset that you take on, it gives you mental clarity, right? So if you sit there and think about, this is somebody's loved one and all that sort of stuff, and it's one of these fights that because our humanity, our flesh will drag us back into these cases many times, and you feel less than human when you try to detach yourself from it. It's this kind of weird thing that goes on as a death investigator. But when you're sitting there and you're working this thing, you're trying to understand, dependent upon positionality of the remains. First off, is this body deliberately here? Like, deliberate can come in two forms. A person can go underneath a home, like the one I'd mentioned to you in New Orleans from all those years ago, and in their life, right? That's a deliberate positioning of a remain. Or they could have gone under the building because they were looking for shelter. I don't know about you. I think that Ontario is a pretty cold place in the wintertime. I'd want to hunker down somewhere if I couldn't get access. So is that what's happening? Do you have evidence of a life having been lived beneath that structure? And people do live in these environments. You'll see beanie weenie cans and, ramen and all kinds of candy wrappers, all kinds of stuff, and maybe a little bedding area. That's one of the things you have to consider.
And this is assuming you're only talking about in the time since 2018 when they stopped renting out apartments in this building.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
All right, do the investigators that are called, because I'm guessing the first call is to police. You find remains, you call police. That's who I would call. Now,
absolutely.
The police get on the phone with you guys and say, hey, got a report of remains. You want to, do you go with cops to the scene? I mean, how does that work out?
I would. I'd show up. And look, the cops, most of the time, they're going to know that you're the one wearing the jumpsuit or the Tyvek suit. Okay. And they're going to say, well, I guess you're going under the building. That's the detective. The detective will go under there. However, it's going to be to us to do the body recovery. Okay. And when I say body recovery, you have to be very careful, because in a case like this, you're not just going to start grabbing things and pulling them out. All right. Because, our one defining thing here relative to death, every death is a homicide until proven otherwise. I'm working this as a homicide. So everything in the immediate area of that body has got evidentiary value. So you're going to have to process it, even if you're having to lay on your back or lay on your side while you're doing it. And you're marking things, measuring things, you're doing photography. Oh, and then you have to, if you have a skeleton, you're praying that is not so disarticulated to the point where you're going to have scattered remains. Now, if I've got a depressed area and the most obvious things that you're going to see, you're going to see the skull. Skull is going to pop in this environment. You can collect the skull. Now, is the skull still attached in any way? So you have to be very, very careful, and you have to, what people find this fascinating maybe, you know what I like to collect human skeletal remains in? Individual paper bags. So if I have a human skull, I will take a big paper bag, and that skull is going directly into that bag in total. One of the reasons is that once you start moving that skull around, guess what comes loose? The teeth, and they'll fall out of the socket. So if I can gently put that into a bag, seal that bag, label it with the case number and what the contents are, I've got it contained. So I'm going to be able to take that bag, because we're not going to do a dental examination under a house or in the basement of some dilapidated building. We're going to get that back to an area where that can be facilitated, right? And so we're going to take those remains back and look at the skull. Then what else is going to be prominent? Well, anything involving the clavicle, the collarbones, the sternum. Sometimes, believe it or not, Dave, ribs are hard to find. Because they will fall away and they'll get into the earth. Vertebral bodies can be quite striking because they're so oddly shaped, and they'll stand out. So you literally have to collect these one by one. That's one of the reasons that you really have to be up on your anatomy, particularly skeletal anatomy, because you might say, I've got C1 through C7, right? Well, I've got T1. I think I've got T3. Where's T2? And so you're working, because you don't want to leave anything behind. So you have to be very, very careful as you're recovering these remains that are skeletonized, and not to mention if there's any remnant of clothing, because this can tell the tape. If this person was shot, for instance, if you've got let's say you're wearing your favorite football jersey, like replica football jersey. Well, that's going to be made out of a synthetic. It's not going to be cotton. All right. So if somebody's been shot in the chest, well, that shirt, that jersey is going to bear witness to the range of fire. You might can discern, I don't know if you can discern directionality. You might can determine if you've got an entrance or an exit based upon the shirt. So that's going to be very, very important as well, Dave.
And so what we're looking here is at the skeletal remains of a body found in a vacant building that is going to be torn down. And right away, everything stops while we try to identify the remains. Joe, based on what was found under the house, they had to immediately think DNA. And as you mentioned earlier, they got on the phone with Othram. They were already familiar with Othram through other relationships. And what does Othram then start with? How does this begin the process? Because as we've mentioned before, it's not as simple as, hey, I got a slide, here's the DNA, and 5 minutes later you have the family tree.
It's going to be very, very difficult. If you don't have soft tissue, for instance, you're not going to be able to necessarily roll a print. And if you could roll a print, if you did have soft tissue, if the person's not in the system, then that data is not going to be useful. However, with Othram, what they're looking for is a couple of things, and it all depends on the status of the body. All right. So if you've got a body that's partially intact and you can get soft tissue, that could be on the slate. Because they're doing all kinds of, Othram doesn't just do unidentified bodies. They're working, as we well know, they're working cases from all over the country involving biological samples like blood, semen, saliva, all those things as well. But with a skeletal case like this, the skull is going to be the most important thing. Or maybe the head of like a femur, right here in the hip, this area, because it's real dense and robust. You can use the pelvis as well. In my experience with them, it has been the petrous bone. inside of the skull, the roof of the inner ear, if you will, and molars. Molars are more robust than the other teeth. The other teeth could be used, but the molars are and you can take your tongue and put it over your molar as opposed to, say, your incisors or your bicuspids or whatever the case might be. There's just more of them there. So you want that, you want that sample that you can get out of there. If they can glean that and extract it, then that's going to open the door for far more information for them as they move forward with the case. You know, there's certain things you can do with a skeleton as far as arriving or settling on an ID. We've been using for years and years. And just to refresh our friends' memories out there, and you and I are going to do an entire episode, Brother Dave, on nothing but forensic anthropology at some point in time. It will probably be a multi-part series. We'll talk about cases where it's been used, and we're going to look at the dimensions of the skull. We're going to try to get an idea about race, which we have, features that are very specific to race. Anthropologists have been using these for years and years. We also get into the idea of what sex the remains are from skeletal findings. We can also do injury assessments. Okay. There's even a methodology that we look for in the pelvic floor with women giving birth. There are changes that take place in the pelvis relative to that. Pelvic dimensions where you have female versus male. The male pelvis tends to be more narrow. And also the robustness or gracile nature of the bones. Gracile meaning fine. So generally female bones are finer than male bones. And so those are some of the things you look at initially. But the problem, Dave, is that doesn't give us specific identity. And even with the teeth, when you're doing a postmortem dental examination with the teeth, you can say, yeah, I got restorations here. They've had cavities or they're missing teeth. But man, if I don't have antemortem records to compare it to, it's
right.
It's no good. It's no
just,
good.
We've gone this path so many times. You can have all the fingerprints in the world. You can have all the blood in the world. If it's not in the system, it's just evidence that can be compared later. So Othram actually then gets all the information they can, and they start building out a tree. They start identifying certain aspects of the DNA, and it takes time. As we mentioned, the remains were found in 2023. Some of the evidence that they had is that, it had been rented as a multi-apartment housing for 40 or 50 years. But after 2018, it was vagrant, people in and out, transients, homeless. So for 5 years, you had plenty of people in and out of that are untraceable by any type of lease agreement. And Othram has to start from a blank slate. As they begin the process of building out a family tree, it's amazing the work they're capable of doing. But it still takes time. In this case, 2 years. That's not long when you realize what they had to figure out. But when everything was said and done, Joe, Othram did identify who this was. And when I looked at who the person was, and even now that we know we know absolutely who this person is, okay? She is not Niagara Falls Jane Doe. She has been identified. We know where she was born. We know when she was born. We know a little bit about her lifestyle and where she was. And believe it or not, it all ties back to this building in Niagara Falls. Brenda Marie LeBlanc. She was born in 1963, Joe. She was originally from New Brunswick, Canada, but spent a lot of time in Niagara Falls and St. Catharines during the 90s. Now, investigators determined and thought that the remains were of female, probably mid-30s, okay? They already had that based on the forensic anthropology, I'm guessing. You know,
Yeah.
they can come up with ideas on
Yeah,
things.
they can.
And when you go back to when was Brenda Marie LeBlanc really last known, last seen, and it was in this general area in the mid-90s when she would have been in her mid-30s. Joe, this is pretty remarkable that the forensic anthropology people before Othram were able to
Yeah.
figure that part out. You
Yeah.
know?
Can I say something real quick
Please.
about the mid-30s thing?
Yeah.
The thing about skeletons is they're a time capsule. It's like frozen. Okay.
Okay.
Because your skeleton being a part of you in life, obviously, goes without saying, kind of obvious, Morgan, but your skeleton is no longer subject to a life being lived. So for that moment, when an individual passes away, skeleton is frozen in time. So you're not going to develop any further. You're not going to develop any further than your mid 30s relative to changes that you expect in skeletons. And, some things, the biggest thing, Dave, is wear. Like, and I don't mean like, where are you? I mean, like wear, like a car, like joint wear, arthritic changes, all these sorts of things that come along with being, and even obliteration of, like, one of the things I'm fascinated by is obliteration of suture lines in the skull and also the hard palate.
Can you explain that again? Can you explain what suture lines are for those who don't know?
Yeah. So suture lines, when we're coming together developmentally in fetal development, our skull begins to fuse, right? And it fuses in a few spots. If you see a skull and you're looking at, you'll see these kind of squiggly lines running right here, and back here and down the midline. You've also got what are called, there's a palatine suture as well. And this extends up into this area. As a matter of fact, when people have a cleft palate issue right here, you don't have this, you have this kind of hole that suture line is affected in this area. It creates this kind of fissure right there where it's not closed. It's part of fetal development. And so the thing about it is this: take your scalp, move it back and forth. You think that that's kind of an innocuous thing, but think about all the times that you frown, smile, okay? Your scalp itself is rubbing on the surface of that bone. It's almost like sandpaper. And so the suture lines get obliterated, right? The more obliteration you have of these suture lines, okay, the more wear can be measured in time, right? Now, can you give a specific, this is your date of birth, depending upon your suture line wear. It doesn't work like that, but you can bracket. One of the things I love about forensic anthropologists is that they are not ashamed to bracket time. Something else they're not ashamed of doing is saying, I don't know. I love that about them, because so many of us say, I can definitively tell you this. In the world of forensic anthropology, they work on these brackets of time or age, okay? And they're not going to, you cannot, you could have a 20 mule team and you're not going to be able to, they won't die on that hill. Because they've been trained like this. They're going to say, this is the best that we can do. All right. And I love that about them. And they'll defend that, and they can tell you why they can defend it, because it's so variable. But with that bracketing of time, considering suture obliteration, dental wear, joint wear, all this stuff. So this person, Miss LeBlanc, when she is found, she's frozen in her mid-30s, right? And I don't mean that in a meteorological sense. I mean that in the sense that time has stopped for her. Now, the only thing that's going to happen to that skeleton afterwards is the impact of the environment and the nature around her. Animal scavenging, and also heat and cold, right? And exposure of the little bugs that are around her, even at a microscopic level. How's that going to affect the bone? But the bone itself is like frozen in time. So anthropology can only get you so far. That's where Othram plays into this, Dave.
But it's still amazing at how far anthropology can take this. Yeah. It's an amazing science. And
it has
come up a number of shows we've done, where it's been a very big part of solving it. And it just adds to the conclusion, okay? So we now have Brenda Marie LeBlanc. We have a woman who was born in 1963. Last seen in the mid-90s, generally speaking, known to be in this geographic area. Her remains were actually found November 8th of 2023. That was the day they were found. Now, as the investigation began, early on, investigators believed they were looking at remains that probably went back to the mid-90s. I'm going to assume it was based on location, clothing, and other assorted information that they had. But it was Othram that was able to actually take all of the information and then put it together in building this family tree. And, as we mentioned, it takes time because Othram takes it to a step and gets information, and they send it back to the detectives who now have to put feet on the ground. They're doing interviews. They're tracking down people that lived. I mean, it's an amazing process.
Yeah, it really is.
It really isn't just as simple as Othram puts it in the computer and out comes the name. It takes so much effort from so many people. And all I'm thinking, Joe, is that Brenda Marie LeBlanc had people that cared about her, loved her, and lost touch with her sometime in the mid-90s. And they never knew what happened. They still don't know.
Yeah, they don't. And they will continue to work this case as a homicide. I'd be very curious because I've had cases like this. If this is a transient stop, if this is a location where you've got transients that are in this area, if they're abusing drugs, this sort of thing, I'm not saying this happened in this case, but one of the things I have had on several occasions happen in death investigations is that if you have a group of drug abusers that are around one another and somebody ODs, guess what they do with the body? They're not going to give up their environmental space, but they might take the body and deposit it somewhere where no one's going to find it, because the last thing somebody that's drug dependent needs is an interruption in their use of drugs. And if they take you downtown, first off, you're going to be answering for why is there a dead body adjacent to you? And secondly, you're not going to be able to get whatever drug you're dependent upon. And so I've had bodies that have been dumped in locations and there was no trauma to the body at all other than the fact the person OD'd. I'm not counting that necessarily as trauma. I mean, it's traumatic, and they OD'd. But I've had bodies that have been buried, discarded, thrown in dumpsters, all kinds of things like that go along with a lifestyle, a life that's led on the street. So all that being said, Othram has given this woman her identification. Okay. It's going to be up to the police in this area to follow up. Can anybody be found? Is there anybody still remaining in this area that might have a remembrance of her? Was something said along the way, where this event marked them for a period of time, and now they want to purge themselves of this memory? The beauty of this case, though, is that it demonstrates in an otherwise seemingly hopeless situation that there is, in fact, hope. And that's what I love about Othram. And I urge each and every one of you to please go and visit their website at dnasolves.com. You might live in a particular area, and you can do this geographically on there. It's really cool. You go in there and you look up, what are the cases in my area, in my jurisdiction, if you will, and do I have an interest in this and helping them get this solved? It requires money. They're not a government organization, and it takes X amount of dollars to flip the switch, and they can start working the case. But you can crowdfund this. You can go out there and say, this case really tugs at my heartstrings, or I'm really interested in this. I want to put a few bucks toward this case. You have the ability to do that. This is one of these circumstances where you literally have a chance to impact an investigation. Okay. You don't get that chance very often, but Othram has opened that door for everyone. So please do yourself a favor. Go and visit dnasolves.com. For me and Dave, I'd like to say, this is Body Bags. And I'm Joseph Scott Morgan.